right now it's a little bit chilly, but you still see guys in fishing out there, out in the middle of the
Okay.
lake. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, I don't know.
Do you ever go fishing, Hein?
Oh, lots. I used to go a lot. Um, I didn't do lake fishing. I did sea fishing. So from the side, in the winter we have shad fishing, which is extremely popular from the side. And then I did a lot of deep sea fishing when I was younger, for snook or barracuda, tuna, a lot of what we call bottom fish. That's like snapper and things like that. Um, yeah, I used to enjoy fishing a lot. We launch ski boats from the beach into the waves, which is quite dangerous. Um, but we used to fish that way.
Yeah, well, we used to go fishing a lot, but we always fished in the lakes. And sometimes one of us would go walk down the beach away from the shore, away from the others, and fish, and then come back. So one day, Daddy went down the lake somewhere, and he came back, and his head was hanging down. And he's kind of moping around, and Mother said, "What in the world's wrong with you?" He says, "I feel sorry for the worms." So after that, we didn't do much fishing. Then it got to where we didn't fish at all.
I'm not a big fish eater, so I catch and release. For me, it was more about the fun.
Well, we fished for like bluegill and bass, so we ate them.
Yeah, we've got big bass dams here, right here where I am. Uh, Big ones, big fishing competitions and stuff. But I've never.
Morning, everyone. Let's sing a song. Praise the Lord this morning. Let's turn to page 26. You on the internet don't have a book, unfortunately, but it is as the deer panteth. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long for worship thee. You alone, my strength, my shield. You alone, my spirit. My desire, and I long to worship you. My friend, and you are my brother, and all you are a king. I love you more than the others, so much more than anything. I sing, I sing, you are, may my spirit hear. You are on my heart, desire, and I long to worship you. Or silver, it's sun, this sun. Joy never and the end. Oh, no. with us.
Are you back on? Yeah.
Everything like it's your turn, Brent.
Just let me know when you want me to start.
Okay, go ahead.
Chris?
Ready.
I can't hear anything.
Go ahead. We're ready for you.
Sorry, I still can't hear. You said I'm ready to go? Okay. Well, thank you for the music, and we're ready to start part two. This is actually we're going to be entering into chapter 7, and we'll be spending several days there. It's kind of what we've been planning for this whole time, is to begin to measure the tabernacle. We just have one more thing to cover, which is an important thing. It won't take long, but it's very important to understand the book of Revelation and understanding even some of the things in the tabernacle itself. So when you look at a seal, it's not a coincidence that modern legal seals on contracts resemble splats of blood, because they originated from the ancient practice of sealing covenant contracts. Even to this day, covenant contracts, for example, marriage, property, etc., are distinguished from ordinary contracts by the presence of a seal. In ancient times, a seal was used to represent each party in agreement with the covenant. So when they're in agreement with the covenant, they each sealed the covenant. So a splat of their own blood was considered the best representation of each of the parties. So what are you going to use to represent yourself to seal this? Well, my representation is my own blood. That can't be more of a representation of me. Soon afterwards, the splat of blood from the best of each man's flock represented each party on a covenant. The sacrificial blood from the best of their flock at a time when livestock was their premier source of livelihood was a costly representation of the sincerity of each tester, especially when you had two great kings, going to enter into a covenant. It was more, I guess, easier and more considered, I guess, more progressive, and that the blood that was not from their own hand, but from the best of their flock. But either way, it was a splat of blood sealed the covenant. It's kind of important to see how it sealed the covenant too, because remember, at that time, books weren't flat; they weren't flat papers; they were rolled up onto scrolls. So today, our signatures have become our legal representation on anything we're in agreement for in a legal contract. So your signature is not you, but it's your legal representation in any contract is affixed to. So if you got into any sort of legal contract dispute, the first thing that would be sought to establish is whether the signature of the contract is your signature. Is this your signature, Mr. Jones? And if you try and say no, they compare it and see whether it is or not. But in this way, our signatures replace the ancient use of a seal composed of a splat of blood to signify your representation on an agreement. So when they were rolled, the advantage of the blood seal was that the wet blood would soon dry and serve to seal the scroll. So it would dry and harden, and that would keep the scroll shut. So that way, if it was ever broken, because it's a pretty delicate seal, but if you tried to open it after it's sealed, it'd be obvious that someone had tampered with it because the seal had been broken. So the splat of blood was applied to the outside of the scroll along the edge, or in some notable contracts where there was a fairly lengthy contract, it'd be sealed in several places. So as they're rolling it up, they'd put splats of blood, rolling it up, put splats of blood. Sometimes they even weave ribbon into there and stuff like that. So it'd be obvious, as these seals happen to be broken, that that someone had opened the scroll, and only the parties that were part of the covenant were allowed to break the seal or have the seal's consent to be broken to be opened. So that way, it also kept the information confidential. It was sealed. It was confidential. You couldn't just open it up and read it. It was confidential between the two parties. The same thing applies in law today, where you go to court, say in a divorce case or something like that, where you want to keep some information private from the public viewing it or whatever. Excuse me. You can ask the judge to seal that from the public, and they can keep it under seal or keep it confidential out of the public records for a certain period of time or for however long they determine. So sealing is a way of both, there's two different meanings, but one was to conclude and authorize the contract. The second ancient benefit was it kept things confidential. Only when those seals were broken would the scroll be opened and you could read it all. That's why in Revelation you have 7 seals for the generations, and only the one that's a party to that, the only one that affixed that seal on there, can have them be opened for others to read. So, and also in antiquity, so there's signed, sealed, and then delivered. So in antiquity, there would be 2 copies of the scroll of the covenant, and they're each sealed, and one person got a copy of each. Or there's another way of doing it, which is, say it was for a debt covenant, then they were sealed. The one that was owed the money would hang on to the contract, and then it would be given back to the person once they paid their debt, and then that person could then open the scrolls and have it have it canceled, the debt canceled. But either way, only the parties that were a party to the covenant could have the scrolls broken. But it was considered in effect as soon as the copy was delivered. So if the 2 kings walked away with a copy in their hand of each, it was in effect that day. It was only in effect once it was signed, sealed, and delivered. The same thing in law today. A binding contract is drafted between 2 parties, and 2 originals are created. The parties each sign both copies so that one has been signed and sealed, an exact copy of the original in wet ink. So they usually have you make 2 copies, you sign them both. Once both parties have signed it, an electric copy of the original is delivered to each party. Contract is considered binding and in full force after it has been signed, sealed, and personally delivered to each party. And that's an important part of the law. So the atoning blood of Jesus is that which seals the covenant of God with mankind. First is equally the Son of God and the Son of Man. Only the blood of Jesus can equally represent both God and mankind in the covenant. Adam was the first man entered into the covenant with the Lord, but it was the sacrificial blood of the innocent substitute through which the Lord made coverings for Adam and Eve that temporarily sealed the covenant. The same is true for Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and all others that the Lord entered into his covenant as a temporal representatives of man through the sacrificial blood of the covenant. But from the beginning, the Son of God was given to be the mediator of the covenant. And a mediator is someone who brings both parties of the dispute together in agreement. The Son of God has always represented God in the covenant. He's always been the one to manifest the word of God to mankind. He walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. When they broke the covenant, he stepped in the gap and put his enmity between Satan and his seed, and the woman and her seed. And he is the seed that shed his blood in fulfillment of the covenant of redemption. All others before him in various stages of the fulfillment of his covenant were representatives. On the eve of his crucifixion, he said, "For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." So it's been signed, it's been sealed, but there's still to be a delivery. In other words, only when he returns, when we see him in all of his glory, just like the high priest on the Day of Atonement, when we saw him in his crown and all of his glory, that's when it's delivered. That's when it goes from being faith to being sight. So it's been signed, it's been sealed, and it'll be delivered personally, by the Lord. In conclusion, this is why we observe in the book of Revelation it reads, "And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and the root of David, has prevailed to open the book, and to break the seven seals thereof. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne, and of the four beasts, and in the midst of the elders, shall a lamb as it had been slain." It's only Jesus that's able to break those seals, because it's his blood that sealed the covenant. And it's his blood that if a book is sealed by his blood, and he wants each generation to be able to read, then seal one is broken, seal two is broken, seal three is broken. As each seal is broken, the book becomes more and more open. That's why the seventh generation and the seventh seal, everything is open. The whole thing is like an open book. And so, we've already had the six seals break, and we've already had prior generations fulfill their duty and watch for the signs and leave us this inheritance of you know what the beast means and what this means and what that means and what's happened in history up till now. But this seventh seal is for our generation. So anyway, it was important to kind of to look at that as well. Um, and I'm going to go through this real quick because it's chapter 6. You can read more of it later on, but it's what is the measuring rod? The measuring rod by which we're given, and we're given two things. Obviously, the measuring rod is Christ, and we in the fulfillment of this covenant. And I had in chapter 6, if you go through this on your own, there's a rod of Aaron. There was the rod of Aaron was brought back to life when there was a big dispute about who the anointed was to be. Took all these dead staffs of wood, and one of them came back to life. One of them blossomed, and that was Aaron's, and that was symbolic of or pointed forward to the resurrection of Jesus, that his anointed would come back to life and bring life as well. But that's the same thing. The rod of Moses did this through all the miracles that were being done, and when it was thrown down, it gobbled up all the other serpents. Just as it said that at the cross, Jesus swallowed up death in victory. But the rod points towards Jesus. But what are the units of measurement on that rod? And you know, and that is time. And we saw that in day four of creation is written, and God said, "Let's be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let it be for signs and for seasons." And that word seasons really means appointed times or appointed place or appointed meetings. So we were to learn to observe time, but one of the main purposes of learning to observe time was to be able to learn the appointed times and the appointed places for meeting. I'm going to really just kind of skip through this. So man has observed time for thousands of years, and it's incredible how little teeny variances can lead to big differences over a period of time. For example, at the time of Jesus, there was the Julian calendar was in place. It was introduced in 46 BC, and it had a calculated length of a year of 365.25 days. So it was adopted, throughout the Roman Empire. And unfortunately, it was 11 minutes short. And this seemingly tiny amount accumulated over a large number of years. So by the 16th century, the problem was corrected. In 1582, Pope Gregory introduced a new calendar called the Gregorian calendar. And by that stage, the Julian calendar was 10 days out of sync with the celestial bodies. So Pope Gregory deemed that the fourth day, or that the day after the 4th of October, so it would be the 4th, next day is supposed to be the 5th, should be the 15th of October, 1582, correcting the error. Unfortunately, the new calendar was not adopted universally. Different countries began to follow it at different dates. The main dates of introductions are as follows, and you see it took hundreds of years. So Rome, Italy, 1582, France, 1582, Spain, 1582, Portugal, 1582. But then you go along and you see 1700s, 1750, 1800, 1900, 1915, 1917, 1919, to Greece in 1923. In fact, if you count all of the Arabic countries, it wasn't until the 1960s that the last one signed on. Anyway, Great Britain and America adopted the calendar in 1752, so a couple hundred years later, 150 years later, I guess. But by that time, the discrepancy was 11 days. So it was ordered that the 2nd of September, 1752, would be followed by the 14th of September, 1752. So we see here the importance of universally agreed upon measurement of time. You, for example, if you wrote a letter in France on the 22nd of April, 1660, and it was sent to England, it could get there 7 days earlier than it was written on the 15th of April. By the time it took 4 days to get there, and you'd open it up, and the date would be the 22nd of April, but you'd be opening it on the 15th of April because you're using two different calendars. And it's taken the point of it's taken a long time for man to come to a universal acceptance of time. In our generation, we've done that, but not much earlier than our generation. It's taken a long time for it to be a universal standard of time, and not just in lengths of days, but in other areas too. But the manner of measuring time based on the movement of the celestial bodies can be referred to as observed time. All around the world, there is evidence that the means that ancient societies employed to measure time is the observation of the celestial bodies. So, according to historian Eric Burton, Stonehenge is likely to have been the Stone Age equivalent of an astronomical observatory used for seasonal and annual events such as equinoxes and solace. The Egyptian pyramids and the tombs of the pharaohs are heavily astronomically oriented. The Warren Field calendar, and this was only discovered a few years ago, is currently considered to be the oldest lunisolar observatory and calendar system yet found. So it takes in the movements of the moon and of the sun. I can show you a picture of this right here. So it's a natural horizon in a mountain, but how they turn it into an observatory is right here. They dug 12 pits along here, and there's exact points, and it shows a little bit more down here. And it says it included 12 pits that correlate with phases of the moon and was used as a lunisolar calendar. The pits align on the southeast horizon at a prominent topographic point associated up in here with sunrise on the winter or the midwinter solstice, thus providing an annual astronomical correction concerning the passage of time as identified by the moon and the solar year and the associated seasons. It was interpreted as a seasonal calendar. The local community relied on hunting migrating animals and carefully noted the seasons to anticipate their food sources. So we measure time by these observations, and it's taken thousands of years to get to this knowledge and to get to this agreement on times. This is really important to note here. Pagan temples throughout the ancient world were carefully oriented towards one or more cardinal directions or astronomical alignments. Ancient Crete was no different. The temple complexes and peak sanctuaries were built to align to a variety of astronomical events. For the most part, the celestial events the temple buildings align to are the rising of various sorts: sunrise, moonrise, the rising of the planet Venus, certain stars. These astronomical events held a sacred place in pagan religion, marking sacred times of the year of a sacred calendar. The alignment of the pagan temples, combined with their careful construction, that's important the way they're constructed, allowed the pagan priests to manipulate the built-in features of the temple to provide outside observers that lacked the same occult knowledge of the priests with the appearance of divine approval and the presence during the sacred astronomical events that would be observed on the sacred days of the calendar. I'll show you how they did that. For example, the throne room of the temple at Knossos includes a number of interesting astronomical alignments, all associated with the autumn equinox. This unique room, this is the throne room that's built in there, with its famous built-in seat flanked by griffins and palm trees, sits along the western edge of the central court. The throne room itself has two doorways along its eastern side, and it also has an anteroom, a sort of front porch, where it opens out the outer court with four doorways facing east. So these six doorways in the throne room and in the anteroom could be opened and closed to change the way the light comes into the room. With the correct doorways open and the sunlight at dawn and the winter solstice would illuminate the throne, and the dawn and the summer solstice would illuminate the adytum on the far side of the room. In addition, at a point in March, shortly before the spring equinox, and again in September, soon after the autumn equinox, the dawn sun would shine a straight line through the anteroom and the throne room through another doorway into the room behind the throne room, lighting up an image one of their gods positioned on a spot on the far wall. So imagine as you're standing there on some feast day, and you know this is the day it's supposed to gather, and the high priest telling you, and all of a sudden they tell you 5 minutes in advance that the presence of the God is going to come, and all of a sudden through a keyhole-sized hole, light shines all the way through the throne room, through the temple, and lights up an image of that God sitting 100 feet behind the throne room, and just for 3 or 4 minutes, and then it's gone. But it happens every year. Every time you're there, you get to come see this, or or the throne lights up, or this lights up. So all these things light up in these pagan temples because they're built that way. They use their occult knowledge of lining up the temple so that the sunrise or sunset or whatever, or the rising of the stars, or would shine their light based on the manipulation of the temple to light up these sacred things. So they made it that way, and made it so that they could use this knowledge to deceive the people. We're going to get back to that in the end here, but so the other type of time that we have besides observed time is historic time. So throughout history, man has demonstrated interest in unearthing the past in search of ancient artifacts. However, this was more treasure hunting until a couple hundred years ago. Beginning in 1875, Egyptian archaeology began with Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, and he brought with him scholars who set to work recording archaeological remains of the country. And then it got into more and more formal um, uh, uh, pursuits. They then began to really get into tomb raiding and et cetera. But they started to make some incredible discoveries. They discovered the method of excavating and coming up with how to decipher the Egyptian writings. Then they had the spectacular unearthing of the tomb of King Tut, and that, because the money and the things involved in there, spawned a whole new field of archaeology. It's only a couple hundred years old, but one of the objectives that archaeologists boasted about was that they would be able to disprove the mythical accounts of the Bible, because the Bible alone named various people and locations that were nowhere else found except for the Bible. So um, in 1846, Henry Rawlinson became the first man to decipher the Mesopotamian writings. And towards the end of the 19th century, they revealed the previously unknown people, the Sumerians, who lived in Mesopotamia before the Babylonians. These are one of the people that the Bible had already said existed. The Sumerians are among the people that were otherwise found in the Bible, including people like the Hittites, et cetera, et cetera. So, what archaeology set out part of the mission was to disprove the Bible. It ended up, and so it confirming it. But something came along where, right in line with Charles Darwin and the same year, actually, as his book published on the origin of the species, uh, archaeology began to turn towards Lyell's principles of long ages and things like that. And they started to date artifacts that they had in their possession for hundreds of years to add more time to these dating of these artifacts, so that soon these artifacts were dated older than the 4,000 biblical year chronology on purpose. So it was, anyway, it was kind of a different story we can get into someday. But the main thing is that the more that we've dug up, the more that archaeologists have found, the more that it has confirmed the biblical records. But it's also given us an incredible precision about time. We've dug up the records of all the different pagan countries and the Persian kings and all those sorts of stuff. And what it's really done for the biblical chronology is it's fine-tuned the biblical chronology. It's fine-tuned it so before it was about 4,000 years, or it was 4,004 years, or et cetera, et cetera. Well, and there was debates about, particularly around whether the sojourn for the children of Israel was 215 years or 430 years, and it's really straightened a lot of those things out in the last 20, 30 years. For example, the SDA commentaries favored a 215 year, and now they favor the 430 because of a painting from 1876 in a tomb in Egypt, which show these people coming to these Semitic people coming to Egypt at a certain time. It was 1876, which is exactly when the biblical chronology says that Jacob entered Egypt. Anyway, we go into different things, and then I make a little bit of a plea here and say that with this background in time, I've created a biblical timeline from Adam's creation to the ministry of Jesus beginning at 27 AD. And this timeline that I include here for your reference is in complete 100% agreement with the most current scholarly timelines, including the King James Study Bible chronology and others. It's exactly the exact same amount of years. I did mine on my own because I wanted to know for myself, and I did it years ago. But I include this here for you. So it goes year zero creation, biblical reference to Genesis. So the year from BC. So how many years back BC would this be? Then it's so for example, birth of Seth from creation, 130 years. Whereas the reference Genesis 5:3, what year BC would that be? 39, 84, and so on, and we go through, all the way through the generations. Then we go through time all the way till 27 AD. So that's included in these 2 pages here. So that's in chapter 6, near the end of chapter 6. But then I'd say, and you'll start to see this soon, that it shows a time period of 4,140 years from Adam creation to 27 AD, the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. And a lot of people have their own timelines, and they devoted a lot of time and effort towards constructing these timelines. And they'll have a timeline somewhere within 200 years of this time. It might be, it's usually less. But if you come to that timeline and you say, okay, well, we can't agree with the rest of this presentation or whatever, then I'm telling you just to wait and see, because the numbers that where it gets to 4140 didn't come from putting together a biblical timeline. It actually comes from the dimensions of the tabernacle itself. And in the end, you'll see that it won't matter about if you're within 200 years of that timeline. It won't matter as to the conclusion you probably come to, and which is that Christ is coming in our generation sometime. You may have some specific date in mind or whatever. I don't. I have a generation in mind, not a date. But no matter what that is, let's just say that you said 27 AD was exactly 4,000 years, not 4140. Well, 2,000 years from that is 2027. So we may come to 2027 from different places, but we get to a point where, I believe things start to happen. You may have other opinions, but I'm saying that all these timelines will converge anyway. You'll see that it all converge. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I stand 100% behind that timeline, and so do most all biblical scholars that in the last 20, 30 years, including, like I said, more and more, Andrews University, etc. But don't get too hung up on it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to begin to measure the tabernacle. But I've given you everything I could before we got into there. The covenant, covenant code, what it is, the holy days, the first observations we make about the mercy seat, and what it was for and what it pointed to, how it pointed to Jesus and really nobody else. But now we're going to take and start to actually measure based on time, the rod that we've been given to observe, because prophecy is a measure from one point in time to another point in time. So we're looking back at the fulfillment of that mercy seat event. We're not looking ahead of that. We're looking at that mercy seat event. So now I can kind of skip ahead here. And yay, chapter 7. Woo! That's what I'm waiting to get to. And we're going to see this chart and we're going to actually build on this chart over and over again and for different ways. But by the time we're finished, you'll be able to understand not only every part of this, but you could fill in the next part and the next part based on everything that we've observed together. So we're going to take our time in this. We're going to look at through this. But the first thing we look at is the mercy seat dimensions, which are given to us. And I want you to notice something here, though. There's two patterns given. Here's the pattern given to Moses, made up of things, made up of articles, made up of furnishings. Note that this pattern is made up of what? It's made of people, of events. It comes out of this, but it results in this temple not made with hands. This temple of the Lord, this covenant people, this covenant events, this covenant fulfillment. So this is the original pattern we're given. And this is what as we observe, the pattern that starts to emerge in the timelines. Thus, Son of Man, show the house of Israel, show the house to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities. Let them measure the pattern, and if they may be ashamed of all that they have done, show them the form of the house, and the fashion thereof, and the goings out thereof, and the comings in thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms and laws thereof, and write it in their sight, that they may keep the whole form thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and do them. This is the law of the house. So start here. Oops. So the mercy seat pattern. So the pattern of the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant is 1.5 by 2.5. So as we proceed to measure the mercy seat from our perspective of time, we are given only the direct reference to the Ark and 1.5 and 2.5. Thus, we will observe the known timeline for the Ark and apply the 1.5, 2.5 pattern to observe the expected mercy seat timeline. So in that timeline I gave you, we look at the timeline for the Ark, and which is the Ark of Noah, 600 years of his life. And as we go, sorry, let's see the whole thing. So we begin in Adam, and we see how many years, 130, 235, 325. So this is adding up how many years to get to these points. And this is adding up the births of these patriarchs. See Enoch, all the way through here is Shem. These are the sons of Noah. But the event happened. Methuselah died in 1756. Same year is the year of the flood. Noah was 600 years old. So that number is easily established as 1656. Now, if I was Moses and I only had that number, 1656, I was told, the ark and these two numbers, 1.5, 2.5, and I was to say, well, when was this mercy seat going to happen? I would just take 1656 times the 1.5 times the 2.5. But anyway, we can easily establish the 1656. And one thing I forgot to mention just before we started here was that I showed you how the pagan temples all allowed light into their temples and manipulated that light to shine on different things to make it look like the divine presence was there. Remember, the tabernacle and temple had no light. No light could penetrate that. It didn't face towards so that you could even try and do that. The gate was on the east. When you worshiped, the sun was at your back. Inside the holy temple, the light was in the holy place was maintained by the high priest. There was no natural light that came in, and in the most holy place, the light that was above the mercy seat was the presence of God. So there's no manipulation of anything. It's just, it's just straight. Um, um, you know, uh, what you're seeing is what you get. So we look at the Adam at creation to the Ark of Noah, 1656 years. The breadth of the mercy seat is given as being 1.5. So from the Ark of Noah to the mercy seat advance, 1656 times 1.5 is 2,484 years. The length of the mercy seat advance is given as being 2.5. So the total length would be from Adam at creation to the mercy seat event would be 1656 times 2.5 equals 4,140 years. And that's what we show you on this timeline, that the total amount of time as you get through here, 4,140 years, is the earthly ministry of Jesus that began in 27 AD. So this time, if you take 4140 minus 1656, because that's what we saw the flood time, you get what? You get 2,484. So that's the time from here we saw the time from Noah, or from Adam to Noah was 1656. You see the total time to Jesus is 4140, and it's easy to subtract 4140 or to add 2484 to 1656, and you get to 4140. So this is the first, so the fundamental observation that we're making about this mercy seat event, because the dimension came from the mercy seat. You got to remember, in everything we're going to observe, where did the numbers come from? Did you or I make it up? Did Moses make it up? It came from a pattern Moses was given, the 1.5, the 2.5. Where did the timelines come from as far as Adam being born, etc.? It came from, from the Lord. It came from what was revealed to Moses. It came from, from history. So none of these things are, um, they're all there. We're just observing them. So we make this incredible foundational observation. The beginning of the earthly ministry of Jesus, 27 AD, occurred exactly 41 years from Adam at creation. This is 2,484 after the flood. The biblical chronological record from Adam to Jesus is an exact match to the mercy seat pattern given for the covenant observation. And in this we observe the evidence of the prophetic truth given for our observation of the pattern given to Moses. It's a supernatural foretelling and fulfillment. In other words, this mercy seat itself, by those dimensions, foretold of that event. Not just by the dimensions. We looked at the shape of it, how it had the cherubim on each hand, and how they were bent down, and how how it looked to Mary and to James and to Peter when they looked into that tomb. We looked at the Day of Atonement, and the fact that it would only be one per year, and all the things that happen, and all that happens through Christ. This is all together one picture, and this is just part of that picture. This is a hard number to go with that picture. When man has theories versus laws, the theory is the explanation part of it. The law is the hard numbers. The law is the, prove it, is it repetitive? Can you replicate that with math? And whenever you're talking with especially secular people or whatever, there's no evidence of the truth of that. You got no evidence. Just words. You got no evidence. You have direct evidence, you have prophetic evidence, but there's never any evidence. And I imagine to myself walking into a bunch of secular people prepared to use that same thing on you and saying, yeah, there's no evidence. Well, and because they're used to using that or whatever, and walk into some, I don't know, like an ancient saloon or something like that, and um, and then sort of turn your back and he's leaving, he's leaving. No, you lock the door and you say, I just want to make sure that no one leaves here. And you hold up the Bible in one hand and a calculator in the other and say, you're going to need these two things so I can show you. Well, what's he doing with a calculator? What do you mean there's going to be some numbers we're going to look at? What would math, what would actually numbers have to do with evidence for the Bible? Well, it's because it's hard numbers that back up, that back up the everything else. And the numbers came from God. They came from this shepherd in the wilderness was given this whole pattern. And we're just looking at the very first thing, but I want to always keep in mind that the numbers and the days and the ways all came from God. God gave the days and the ways of observation for that mercy seat. God gave the name of the anointed. God gave all these things so that we would see very clearly that it was who the son of, who the anointed was, and there'd be no mistake about it. So when we're looking at this thing, just as surely as the prophet Daniel names a specific decree event after which a pattern of 77s and it's fulfilled. Remember, he said, at this decree, watch for this decree, and after this decree, 77s or 69 sevens, etc., would lead to the fulfillment of this ministry, or the same timeline we're looking at right now, the 27 AD. So we observe a specific event timeline given in the tabernacle pattern for the onset of the same ministry. That event timeline is the ark, and the pattern of 1.5 times 2.5 of the mercy seat directly to the one sent to fulfill it in the timeline it would commence. 2.5 times from Adam, 1.5 times from Noah. And in this we observe the beginning of our calling in the seventh generation, to show the house of the Lord uh, in the temple to the house of the Lord in his covenant people. For all prophecy needs one to proclaim it in advance, and at least one to proclaim its fulfillment. Our generation has been specifically tasked and entrusted to observe the prophetic declaration of the tabernacle pattern, sealed from the observation of prior generations, and then to proclaim it. So I'm going to add now to this same, because we looked at the very basic, and now we start to observe more and more and more. And we observe by things that God gave us to observe through. So uh, the days of the Lord. Our understanding continues to rapidly increase in our obedience to observe the days and ways given for observance by the Lord. One such way is observing the days of his covenant people. All the days of Adam were 930 years. In Noah's day, so the Lord used the word they for his people. The day of Noah, the day of Adam, they were all days to the Lord. We begin with Enoch, the seventh from Adam, and the only one prior to the ark of Noah that God took to return to him without first tasting death. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Those are the days and the years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So it's interesting that this is a 365-year life, just like the days of the year. By faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had translated him. But before this translation, he had this testimony that he had pleased God. Enoch, also the seventh from Adam, prophesied of this, saying, "Behold, the Lord cometh with his 10,000 of his saints." So he was a prophet. That was his timeline. We pay special attention to him because he's the only one in the pre-flood timeline that it ever, taste, that God took without tasting death. So let's look at his time now. So 621 years pass from Adam at creation to the birth of Enoch at the seventh generation. And 1,035 years pass from the birth of Enoch to the Ark of Noah at 1656. That's important to look at. So we go back up here for a second, just to show that we have it right on this chart. So we first looked at three key things. We looked at Adam, we looked at Noah, the flood, and we looked at the ministry of Jesus. And we also noticed that these three things are all considered judgment accounts. So the judgment in the Garden of Eden, the judgment of the flood, and the judgment of the cross. And this is how our pattern is kind of established. So we have the first being the ark timeline, which is Adam, to Noah, and then from there, Noah to Jesus, and the total length being Adam to Jesus. So now we're adding Enoch right in here. So he's born at 622, so 621 years prior, and 1,035 years from his birth to the flood. And these numbers are really important. You'll see more and more as we progress. So we have it here. But now we're going to take that same pattern of 1.5 times 2.5, the thing that happened in this arc period, which was Enoch. And then we look at that same 1.5 to 2.5. So 621 times 1.5 equals 931.5. So we go to the ark and we go 931.5. That's exactly when Moses was born. So then we go, okay, it's 621, which is here, times 2.5. So times 2.5 is 1552.5. So if you want to double check that, just take your calculator right now. Go 621 times 2.5. You get 1552.5. Awful odd number, right? 93.5 years, right? 1552.5 years. Well, add those two numbers together, see what you get. You get 2,484 years. And if you look at 15,525, that's exactly how many years it is from Moses to the ministry of Jesus. So again, landing on the same spots. Adam, the flood, Jesus, 1.5 times 2.5. What about from Enoch to the flood? It's 1,035 years. 1,035 times 1.5 is 15,525. That same number that we have over here, which is from Moses to Jesus. However, we take 1,035 times 2.5, and we get 2,587.5. Another very odd number, 2,587.5, which is from Adam to Jesus, because Moses was born exactly 2,587.5 from Adam at creation. If you take 1656, you add 931.5, that time, from the flood to him, you get 2,587.5 years right here. Adam to here is 2,587.5 years. There's 931.5 filled in here. So there's 621 times 1.5, 931.5. 621 times 2.5 is 15,525. Okay, 1,035 from Enoch to the flood. Well, times 1.5 is 15,525. Times 2.5 is 2,587.5. So we've now added two more days, which are two more people that are important to the fulfillment of the covenant. We have Adam, we have Enoch, because Enoch shows the foreshadows the fulfillment of the covenant, foreshadows Christ, foreshadows man being together with God again. So Enoch is the only one, that anything unusual like that is spoke about in the first 10 generations. You have Adam, you have Enoch, and you have Moses. Those are the three that are referred to. The rest are just he was born and he died. He was born and he was dead, except for Enoch's son, Methuselah, was given as a sign that when Methuselah died, the flood would come, and Methuselah did die the same year that the flood came. But other than that, the ones spoken about are Adam, Enoch, and Moses, and Noah, sorry. And then the second generation, of course, um, Moses, the one we've been reading about all this time, where they were preparing to enter this tabernacle, the one who wrote the pattern down for the covenant, and the one who was, who God, made, uh, representative of men, and brought right to the border of the promised land to, in fulfillment of that covenant. So very significant people. So now we have Adam, we have Enoch, we have um, Noah, we have Moses, and we have Jesus. And the pattern is 100% maintained. It's not just the 4140. The 4140 is built out of the 15525 from Moses to Jesus. It's built on the 931.5 from Noah to Moses, which totaled 2,484 years, which is the 1.5 of 1656. It's built on the 1,035 years from Enoch to Noah, the 621 years from Adam to Enoch, which totaled 1,656 years, and all 1.5 times 2.5. I mean, if that doesn't blow you away, then nothing I say coming up will blow you away either. To establish a pattern once is pretty incredible. To establish it over again and show it exists, over again, is very incredible. But we're only still just beginning. So in this, we see that if we add more days or more covenant people, I'm sorry, the mercy seat pattern continues with Adam at creation being the starting point, the Ark of Noah the midpoint, and Jesus the endpoint, anchor, and the fulfillment of it all. These days that God called and entered into his covenant were not born at random times. They were appointed days whose lives were lived in direct accord with the covenant code. We'll observe this again and again as more living days or people are added. What does he say? We're all being built up into the tabernacle of the Lord. We're all like living stones in this tabernacle of the Lord. Here's the evidence of it. And as we get towards our time, it gives us, as we see everything that happened in the past, it gives us more assurance today of how blessed we are to be born at this time and to be called to be heralds of this message of the soon return of Christ in our generation. But we need first to see this for ourselves and to see not just a little bit of it. We're only looking at the tip of the iceberg. But as we go through it all, at the end, we're gonna see his glory in the full and go, and we'll have no hesitation about giving the message because we'll have digested, it'll be part of us. We'll know that it's true. So we'll observe this again and again as more living days are at. This holds true to the end, and in it we see the genuine blessing bestowed upon. Sorry, this no sleep for 4 days is really catching up to me. Upon all those born into the final generation, the Lord calls to herald his return. And then I got one thing here that's pretty amazing to look at, which is going to lead us into our topic tomorrow. So we've talked about, this number. Let's talk about observed time, like real time. So, and this is how the sun, the moons, and the stars, everything we've studied for thousands of years. What does it show us? Well, So go here just for a second. Okay. We see this first number, 621 years. Then we see 1,035 years. 621 minutes is 10.35 hours. Okay. The when we look at the 2.5875 days. So if we took Moses, the thought of a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day. The whole thought about, that Jesus would return in the same pattern, on the seventh day. Um, you know, let's start looking at some evidence for that, mathematical evidence for that. Okay, so if 25,875.5 years was 2.5875 days, well, how many hours are there in 2.5875 days? There's 62.1 hours. Just divide, or just take 62.1 divided by 24. There's 24 hours a day. So in 2.5875 days, this odd number, there's exactly 62.1 hours, 621. And based on our observation of the of time, how many rotations of the how many times will the sun return to the same spot on the sky? So in other words, we say that the Earth rotates 24 hours in a day, 360 degrees. So how many degrees would that be in 2.5875? Well, 25875 times 360 degrees is 93.5 degrees, 93.15. So every 2.5875 days, it's 62.1 hours and 93.5 years rotation. It's exactly observed time. And we're going to understand that more and more and more as we go along. But it won't matter. These relationships always stay the same as you expand them. So for example, let's do a random experiment here. And this is where you can take your notebook, and I'll have somebody, Chris, you can be the leader there for a second. Okay, let's look at 1656. Like it was a day, okay? And it occurs in exact spot of a day. So let's take 16.56 hours, okay? As opposed to years. So 16.56. Okay, Chris, you're doing this, right? And just take your calculator. You're gonna need a calculator, and you can be a witness, and you guys can do this yourself too. But take 1656 and divide that by 24. So 16.56 divided by 24. And you should see, maybe I'll show it here if I can bring a calculator up here just to show you as well. I didn't really plan this, so I mean, it looks too good. Calculator. Okay. One, result third. 16.56 divided by 24 equals, oops. Okay. 16.56 divided by 24 equals 0.69. So 69% of a day is 16.56 hours. Okay. So if I'm going to take 360 degrees, 360 times 0.69, 248.4. So you have 16.56 hours is 248.4 degree. We have 1656 over here, 2484 over here. So if I do the same thing, I put 6.9 days times 24, I get 165.6 hours in 6.59 days. And the Earth would rotate 2,484. It's like 360 times 6.9 is 2,484. All I'm saying is that the relationship remains the same. The units change, but it's all, there's a certain relationship. And you got to remember, God gave these numbers. God gave, and what would be the significance of 6.9? Because you're going to find out that all these events happened at 6.9 is because the next tick of the clock would be the end of the seventh. So they all happen to happen at the 6.9th period of time, with the very next tick of the clock being the end of the seventh. So that they're all fulfillment events, and they're all things that we'll look at more and more and more and more. But they all have things in common. You may not see them right now, but this is only the beginning of filling out the chart. But I don't want to gloss over it. It's amazing as it is. You have Adam, you have Enoch, you have Noah, you have Moses, you have Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, all covenant people. All this covenant given to Adam that he would crush the serpent's head. All these events happening at exact and precise times, all in a relationship and a pattern from one to the other. I mean, when you look at a pattern, what do you need to see in a pattern? Like a pattern, there has to be at least three items to establish the pattern. And then you can build the rest of the pattern. But you need these fixed points. And if they're not, if one of them is off just by a little bit, there's no pattern. So it wouldn't matter if this number is 1656 and 2484 added up to 4140. It wouldn't matter because God never promised us that this would be the case with Enoch, with Noah, and with Moses. But it happens to exactly be the case that they too are in the same pattern. And what does that mean? It means that those people, like they justify him, he justifies them. They are his tabernacle, his people. That's why you see in Revelation and about gates being named after people and different roles being given to different people. I mean, Noah spent his lifetime preaching and building an ark, and Enoch was a preacher, and um, you know, uh, you know, the things that Moses went through, and the being banned from Egypt, and trying to lead 1 million people that are kicking and screaming all the way. All these people are justified in the same pattern. And remember, Moses wrote this pattern, gave out this pattern, and we're just observing it now. We're only looking at. We've looked at the mercy seat and who could approach it and what it looks like and how physically it was. We're only looking at the pattern that was given for the mercy seat for the 1.5, 2.5 in relationship to the ark, which we're going to look at next, um, and recognizing that in these genealogies they're exactly the same, as if the same one who gave the pattern was in control of it, and we know that to be the truth. So I'm not going to, I don't want to overwhelm us in these meetings. I just want to introduce for the first time, get into the seventh chapter. I'll be sending out the book before you guys leave. You'll have all these charts and everything else, but I want to kind of get into our next lesson first, and then we'll start to share more. But we'll understand more and more, even about why 1656 years or why 621. We'll understand what the whole thing is about, what reconciliation is happening here, and why it's these numbers, and how they compare to 666, and how they compare to the seventh. And it's really an amazing story, and we're just beginning to observe it. So with that in mind, I'm at my time again, and I'm happy to have entered into this period, And looking forward to tomorrow, where we'll continue to look at this amazing pattern. So I just stop share over here. Go back to here.
Someone has a question.
What's that?
Yeah, Kim has a question.
You said 1035 times 2.5 equals 2587.5. And you said that was representing Adam to Jesus. But you said previous to
No,
that,
no,
that
that's Adam to
4140 represented Adam to
No.
Jesus. So I'm wondering what the
no.
2587.5 is referring to.
It's referring from Adam to Moses, the birth of Moses. Chris, you're on mute. Can
Yeah,
she stay for a second? Does she understand that?
you can explain it again a little bit.
What's that? You can still hear me, right? So she can hear me? So yeah, let
She
me just
did hear it, and she was getting an
Okay.
idea. You can explain it a little more if you want.
yeah, let me just go. Can you see that? Okay, so let's just go through this over here. So from Adam, so here the top line over here is Adam at creation to Noah.
Down lower.
Or
I know. That's 1656 years to the flood. Down here in this light blue arrow is Adam at creation to the birth of Moses is 2587.5 years. So which is 931 and a half years after the flood, but it's from Adam to here, and then from Moses to Jesus is another 1552.5 years to AD 27. So the timeline would be 2587.5 to Moses, another 15,525 to Jesus. So I hope that answers that question. And
down,
what's that?
Scroll down.
We're good?
scroll down.
Scroll down what?
Right there.
This
Adam
there.
to Jesus.
Oh, okay. Well, that was me having 2 hours sleep. That should say, okay, just 1 second. We're going to change that, right? You know what? And now what does it say? Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I
Thank
had
you
a
for
thought also.
what's that?
Uh, how do you know when to use the 1.5 or 2.5? I see that like the time of the birth of Moses to the birth of Jesus is the same as a 1.5 width of the mercy seat. But when do you know when to use 1.5 instead of 2.5, or vice versa? Or
Because
does 1.5 and 2.5 always point
yeah,
to every event? And
no,
you
you
also
got you take everything before the flood is 1. Everything from the flood forward is 1.5. And the 2.5 is always the length. It's the total length. So it's like when you read even in the mercy seat there, it says, and the length shall be 2.5. So the breadth is the width. So the width it's the width of the ark. So from the ark until Jesus is the 1.5. But the from Adam, the total length, he's got to take that same unit, that same 1656, but times 2.5. And we'll get into that as we get into the ark. There's another dimension, which is the height, and that always refers to not the mercy seat event. That refers to the crown event. That refers to the return. So if we keep it simple, it's just, if you consider arc is one, arc to Jesus is 1.5, and total length from Adam or from creation to there is 2.5. It's, and it makes sense, but it takes a little bit longer to explain. That's my short answer anyway.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, when you said there were three pointing to each event. Yeah,
Well,
length
there's
of
got to be 3 points in a pattern, right? So when God gives us the mercy seat of 1.5 times 2.5, well, that's, he hasn't given us on purpose. He didn't give us, sort of height or whatever, because the arc is that first timeline, in the arc, he gives us 3 dimensions, 1.5 to, but on the mercy seat, he only gives us 2 because it's a covering of the ark, and wants us to pay attention to the ark. Remember, it's God who sealed them in the ark. It's God that shut them in. It's the ark has its own pattern that's related incredibly to this pattern too, but that's a whole other story. The days of the ark, the days that they settled, are related to the tabernacle boards and all kinds of stuff that it's amazing. But that ark is a whole other study, and it's like a week-long study on its own. So, any other questions
very
coming
cool.
from today?
I just wondered about on top of the ark where the border was, and it talks about the width of a hand or something. I don't know what
Yeah,
that means.
about 4 inches. So the crown,
4 inches.
yeah, the crown along the top of the ark should be about a hand's width. So if you measure the width of your hand, it should be about 4 inches.
Okay. Do you think there's a reason for him saying that instead of saying some other measurement?
Um, well, one would be for the builder would have to know, the size to build it to, but probably, every other number I've ever studied, there's a reason for it when you dig into it. But anyway, did that make sense? I mean, I don't want to lose people on the way. I don't want to go too fast, but I don't want to go too slow either. So, we have several days that are going to be on this day 7, but the important thing is to be able to first of all observe that there is a pattern, and how incredible the pattern really is. So, anything else before
Any other questions?
what we'll do tomorrow is, if people have questions as we're going through it, I'll have them write it down and bring it up to you that way they can have a question at the end. I think someone else is about to have a question.
No more questions right now.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I guess we will see you tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow at 11 a.m. The Covenant Code with Brent Meikle, October 24. And don't forget that we also have tomorrow Lem Ramirez in the morning at 9 o'clock, Lem Ramirez. And after Lem tomorrow at 9, we have I guess we
Sherry.
have Abel Camacho at
I thought
10
Sherry's.
a.m. Says brace yourself. So it's Lem and then Abel and then Brent tomorrow. And we also have this afternoon at 4 p.m.
No.
We will have Sherry on Zoom. So you might stick around for that as well.
Those are pretty good. Those are really good, actually. And this was good. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Was that your mom walking around in that Christmas tree blanket?
She says she's freezing. You turned it up. Turn it up to 75.
I have to call her. Tell her we're calling her Princess Pine Tree.